Because climate change is essentially an unpriced externality, the obvious solution is to put a price on it, either through a carbon tax or cap and trade. And we have discussed these solutions already on multiple episodes. However, another complementary approach that has gotten a lot of attention in the past decade is through changing behavior directly through nudges. And one example of such a nudge is that you could send an energy report to a home with information about how your energy use compares to the energy use of your neighbor. And research has shown that these type of energy reports can reduce average energy consumption by 1 to 2% consistently. And that is a great result, as it's generally very hard to change people's electricity use. Now, as a result, energy providers in the United States have widely adopted such energy reports, and policymakers have put a lot of praise on them. The company that developed it was acquired for more than $500 million. Now, while this is a great success story on the surface, there also has been a puzzle in the literature, because the majority of the short-run effects persist 2 years after the energy reports are discontinued. However, this result stands in contrast to other areas like charitable giving, financial savings, voter turnout, and so on, where those nudges don't persist. So the paper we are going to discuss today has figured out the reasons why these nudges in energy can be so successful in conservation in homes, and why they fail to be potentially persistent in other contexts. And once you get the idea, which is a really cool but also simple one, you too might be able to see the opportunities to apply these insights in climate policy, other policy areas, and maybe even your personal life. So I'm happy to have Alec Brandon on, an author of the paper. Alec is an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. His research focus is behavioral economics. And using a variety of empirical methods, Alec has studied the long-term effectiveness of nudges in various areas and the extent of racial profiling in policy. His research has been published in leading journals like Science and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And prior to joining Carey, Alec received his PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. So, Alec, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you on because I really like your paper and its title. So I forgot to read that during my introduction, which is Do the Effect of Nudges Persist? Theory and Evidence from 38 Natural Field Experiments. So what is kind of your paper about, and what would you like people to take away from it?
Yeah, so I think sort of big picture what our paper is about is trying to see whether this really promising type of research that started up maybe a decade ago on nudges can produce persistent effects, long-term effects, which are just important in general, but especially important for things like climate change. And if they do persist, why? And if we can answer that why question, maybe we can replicate the success of persistent nudges and design them in a more effective way. That's sort of maybe the multi-sentence summary.
I think that's a really good summary of exactly the importance of your research. And what then did you kind of find in this paper?
Yeah, so what sort of one of the things that motivated us to pursue this project was that there was some early mixed evidence on whether nudges continued to change behavior after people stopped receiving them. And in the early days, and by early days, I mean like 2015, let's say, there was some evidence that the effects of nudges could persist for a couple of weeks, for maybe some months, but they would wane pretty quickly. And
what would be an example of such a nudge?
Yeah, so I think sort of what comes to mind for me were some nudges that encouraged people to exercise more, some nudges to get people to turn out and vote more, give to charities, that type of thing. And yeah, it didn't seem like nudges were really transforming who people were in those contexts, but that then sort of apart from that, there were a couple of papers on water conservation and energy conservation, and there the papers were finding just really tremendous levels of persistence. So a couple of papers on water conservation nudges found that just one letter would lead to savings that persisted years later. And then there were some industry white papers, and then also some academic papers on this home energy report that we study that found 80%, 90% of the effect of the nudge remained in the home after it was randomly discontinued. And so we kind of wanted to try to make sense of that. Like, why would you see it in one place and why would you not see it in these other contexts? And so, I to maybe continue on there, like the simple thought we had was, maybe the reason it's persisting with energy conservation and water conservation is because if someone sort of tells you, hey, you're using way more, if you're doing way more than your neighbors at this sort of activity, water conservation, energy conservation, you can adopt technology to affect that. And that technology can just keep providing the desired conservation, regardless of what behaviors the people in the home are doing. And the other behaviors just aren't really like that. Voting, charitable giving, exercise. I mean, there's just not really the same types of technologies, and so that's sort of what set us down this path, is that sort of puzzle and that sort of simple observation about a potential difference between the two types of behaviors.
Yeah, so it's like with voting, you could get a nudge and then you go vote because you got the nudge, but then next election you don't get it, so you stop going. Whereas here, the nudge of the energy report somehow gets you to install something more efficient, which then stays.
Yeah, that's exactly the idea.
So did you have kind of this idea going in, or is it something you developed while you were looking at the data?
I think we had this idea going in. I think the basic idea was that, I guess to maybe, give a look behind, to sort of discuss a little bit about what was going on when we started this. There was sort of at the same time as interest in nudges, some just even more basic work on habit formation with experiments, often with incentives, where you would maybe incentivize a behavior and then take away the incentive and see if the behavior, the change in behavior persisted. And there just really was not a lot of evidence of habit formation, certainly at the level that you would need to get some of the persistence that was being found in energy and water conservation. There's some papers from like, 08, 09 that will argue, we'll find like 5%, 10% of the effect persists and call it habit formation. And, I guess that's right. They are rejecting a null of no habit formation, but it just wasn't at the level that you would need to get the types of persistence that were being seen with a specific set of nudges. And so I think we had a bit of a skepticism about habit formation as a mechanism here. I mean, I guess to be totally honest, like, the habit formation model started as a description of addiction to cigarettes or addiction to heroin, and I believe that story because there's like a chemical compound. There's I'm not a medical doctor, so maybe I'm using the wrong terms here, but there's something about your chemistry that is affecting that, whereas like a brief incentive to vote, or I guess no one was incentivizing voting because that's sort of questionable legality, but an incentive to exercise or an incentive to save more money, I don't think that's really changing who people are. And even more so with nudges, which are intentionally light touch, intentionally not trying to change who people are. And so I think we sort of had, I think one building block going into this project was a bit of a skepticism about the underlying mechanism that would that was often being brought up for why a nudge might be able to produce such a long-term effect. So I think that was sort of one building block. And then I think the second building block was that you could decouple, and we knew this from some of the earlier O-Power papers.
Power, by the way, is the company that sent
yeah.
out these energy reports.
Yeah. So thank you for that context. O-Power was the company that designed and developed the home energy report. The sort of early papers on it mentioned how they had to drop homes that where someone moved, and the reason they were doing it was econometric. They didn't. They were worried about having a balanced panel. We don't need to get too much into the weeds on that, but we noticed that there was sort of that the company could observe this thing, and we also sort of had a sense that you could use a feature like that to decouple the effect that the program had on an individual from the effect it would have on the home or the technology that was installed in the home.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think then we're getting to the core of your paper, because maybe then do you want to talk a little bit exactly about this energy report that people get, and then like the people moving in and out? Because I think before people got something in the nudge, and the idea was that they changed their behavior in the home, like you're more efficient. So could you just talk a little bit about the setup then?
Yeah. So the basic idea that I sort of set up, but I'll elaborate on now, is that let me give the background on the report, I guess, first. So the basic setup of these home energy report experiments, and there were like at least 100 of them run between like maybe 2008 and 2015, and they very well may be still running. But the basic setup was you got homes in so an energy provider partners with O-Power. Then O-Power, in an effort to demonstrate the effectiveness of this thing that the energy provider is paying for, which is the home energy report, has sort of a small control group, maybe 20-40% of the homes. And then there's a treatment group that gets one of these letters, monthly, quarterly, something like that, that rate. And the letters would say, this is how much energy you use, this is how much energy your neighbors used, and this is how much energy your efficient neighbors used. And then it gave you like a bit of an assessment of your energy use. Like I think there's a smiley face if you use less than your efficient neighbors. There's sort of a like neutral face if you use more than your efficient neighbors but less than all your neighbors, and then there's a frowny face if you use more than all your neighbors. And so these letters would get sent out, monthly, quarterly. They vary. They also O-Power also experimented with that, but found that the rate didn't matter a ton. And then there was another quirk, which is that once a homeowner moved, the house would be taken out of the experiment, and the letters would stop going out. And that's just sort of I don't think that was like an intentional feature. I think that's just sort of common sense. Like the energy provider didn't want the new resident of a home to be getting a rating on energy use that they had no involvement in. And so that ended up being very convenient for us, because if the letter stops going out to the home after the initial resident moves, but O-Power continues to observe the energy use in that home, we can measure the effect that the report had on energy use, related to the home specifically, and separate that from the effect it has on the individual that was getting the report as well. And so I guess maybe to put a finer point on that last comment, really what we do in the paper is just say, the effect of getting the home energy report on the individual in the home and the home is that 1% to 2% that you mentioned. I think we were at 2.1%, which lines up with the papers that correspond with the sample we're looking at. And then once the initial resident moves, the home energy report continues to have an effect of about 1.1%. So a little over 50% of the home energy report's effect remains in the home after the initial resident moves.
And that is then the technology story.
Yeah, we attribute that 1.1% to technology adoption. And then we attribute the 2.1% minus 1.1%, so that the remaining 1% to habit formation, to some role of habits.
And I think one of the really also interesting things about your paper is you looked at the difference between renters and owners. So in general, you find that it's 50%. So half of it is habit formation. So it's not completely out the window. 50% is technology, was overlooked. But then you also have an interesting look at like homeowners versus renters.
Yeah, we that sort of started as a way to convince referees that what we were doing made sense. But it luckily it sort of turned into an interesting point in its own right. So I guess to expand on that, counter to what I was saying earlier about our skepticism of habit formation and also maybe this, our hypothesis that habit or that technology adoption was really so important, was that some of the early papers on the home energy report found that whether someone was renting or owning a home had no effect on whether the home energy report caused energy savings or not. And the reason that I say all that is, especially in the United States, there's just not much of a culture of renters adopting energy efficient technology. Partly that's just sort of contractual, like you're not allowed to make significant changes to where you live if you're renting.
Yeah, you're barely able to change the paint without approval, let alone.
Yeah. But also it's and I guess this is maybe also contractual, is like, why would you adopt energy efficient technology if you're renting? Like, you're just probably not going to be living there long enough to accrue the benefits necessary to pay off the extra cost associated with adopting the energy efficient technology. And so what we find is that if you just look at that subsample of renters, much like the earlier work where that found that renters and homeowners were responding to the home energy report in similar ways, we find the same thing. And then once a renter moves out and a new renter moves in, none of the effect remains in the home, suggesting that the renters are adopting some habits. They are changing something. There is something significant leaving the home when the initial renter moves and a new renter comes in. And so, if people are true believers in habit formation, and I don't think there's any reason not to be, then I think that's sort of a result you could really hang your hat on, is that there is an important slice of the populace that rents, and for whatever reason they seem to react to this this intervention in a way where they're getting persistent behavior, and it seems to be coming from the habit channel, not the tech
Yeah,
channel.
exactly. I think it's an important point because we'll get to the homeowners later, but renters, their only way to achieve the energy reduction is just by changing their behavior, basically by turning off the light switch a little bit, faster,
Mhm.
or when they're leaving, all these types of things, which is important because then when they leave, they take that habit formation
Mhm.
with them. Or another way of saying it, like their changes are cost free, which is then
Yeah.
I think is a different story when you look at the homeowners because
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. On an accounting spreadsheet, it's cost free. That I think that's part of the big appeal of habits is they make certain evaluations look a lot better. I guess sort of the response to that is that maybe there's psychic costs associated with adopting habits uh, that would be important to factor in, and that's there's people working on that question. I would not say I'm an expert on that specifically, but I agree with your point. Like in the tangible sort of uh, GDP type of outcomes, habits are a great thing to be able to generate because you're sort of getting something for nothing.
which is I think also one of the points you make in the paper is that when you look at homeowners, they do change their technology, and that's not cost free accounting or slash economic wise.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like maybe that might have been overlooked as a prior cost to account in these cost effectiveness of these programs.
Yeah, that is sort of one of the big implications we try to emphasize in the paper is that if there's a lot of interest in evaluating whether government interventions or even private interventions, like maybe a company making changes to its processes, whether those things work or not. And I'm a big believer in that kind of work myself, but it's tricky to do that kind of work because a lot of the time the outcome you have access to is not going to capture the everything that people might be reacting to that's allowing them to change their behaviors. And so in our specific context, if people are adopting technologies in response to the home energy report, then you're going to want to account for the expenditures that are being induced by the home energy report when you compare the benefits that it generates to the costs that it requires um, to administrate and to react to for a homeowner. And we didn't have very yeah, I mean, we didn't have any real information about the technology that people were adopting in response to the home energy report. So to do that exercise, we just sort of borrowed some back of the envelope estimates from the literature that say, it costs this many cents per kilowatt hour saved if you do it through tech.
Yeah.
And we sort of picked a lower bound and an upper bound. And it really does matter for getting the exact right estimate of net benefits. But it doesn't really matter if you want to just give a thumbs up, thumbs down to the home energy report. There's net benefits regardless of how you do it.
So it stays net benefit, but it does substantially like reduce the overall benefits.
Yes, it does take a chunk out of the benefits,
Yeah.
and I mean that's just sort of simple accounting, right?
Yeah.
It's always good to be making a point about accounting because you can be pretty confident you're right.
Yeah. Because one thing then that I think is also really interesting is the paper before the Alcott and Rogers paper in 2014 and Bernardo et al. In 2014. They looked at technology and then excluded it as a possibility. Could you
Yeah.
talk about why, which was then is kind of established that it was only habit formation because they excluded that channel. Could you talk about why you're more confident or where the difference is coming from?
Yeah, definitely. So, there was sort of this. I mean, they're very much contemporaneous papers. I think the Hunt Alcott and Todd Rogers paper in 2014, and then I'm not going to remember all the co-authors on the Burnetto et al. Paper. Well, I think it's Burnetto and then Mike Price and Paul Ferraro, and so the first of those papers was on energy conservation with the Home Energy Report. The second was on water conservation with an intervention very similar to the Home Energy Report. And they sort of did two different things, but came to the same conclusion, which is what you just mentioned, which is that it doesn't seem like tech's really driving the long run effectiveness of these interventions. So what the Hunt Alcott and Todd Rogers paper did is they had some data from energy providers that recorded whether homeowners participated in rebate programs that the energy providers were offering. So it's pretty common in the U.S. I imagine it's common in Europe as well for energy providers to advertise, like do X, Y, or Z, and send us a receipt and fill out a form, and we'll give you $50, $100 off of the whatever the tech is that you adopted. And so what Hunt and Todd Rogers did is they compared treatment and control at three sites where the Home Energy Report experiment was conducted, and they just really saw no difference in participation in these programs across the folks getting the Home Energy Report and the folks who weren't. I think they do sort of a back of the envelope calculation and say that something like 1% of the Home Energy Report's effectiveness could be attributed to technology adoption through that rebate channel. And then sort of around the same time, Burnetto, Mike Price, and Paul Ferraro were thinking about water conservation. And they did an early version of this movers design where they tried to look at how much of the water conservation remained in the home. And I hopefully this isn't wrong, but I suspect that for both of those, actually, it's probably true for both papers. I suspect that for both of the papers, these were analyses that were at the very end of the paper, and those types of analyses tend to be the most speculative.
Yeah.
And I think the sort of well, actually, sorry, I didn't finish what the Burnetto et al. Paper found, which was that so they didn't find any persistence remaining in the home from the long-term effectiveness of water conservation. But I think it's pretty easy to sort of sit back and reason through why technology adoption might still be an important mechanism, but those papers were finding what they were finding. I think in the case of the Alcott and Rogers paper, it's that I don't participating in a rebate that your energy provider offers is something that's kind of cumbersome. And if you're doing sort of small types of adoptions, if you're installing energy efficient light bulbs, or you're putting a door sweep on the bottom of your door, these are things that I think there were probably rebates for energy efficient light bulbs, but is it worth it? I don't know. I mean, those sorts of programs are notoriously undersubscribed for sort of straightforward reasons.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for not a lot of return.
Yeah. And so unless the Home Energy Report was really causing pretty dramatic changes to a home where like a contractor is getting involved and they're going to deal with the rebate process, I just don't, it's not obvious to me that that's the right type of adoptions to look at. And then in the case of the Burnetto et al., go ahead.
Let me check. So, because they then looked at the rebate programs, and then So just to check again, the reason why you can then now study the adoption is because you keep seeing the home even after people move out.
Hmm.
So it's like you don't have to infer from any type of rebate. You just keep observing the house after the report stopped. So
Yeah.
there's no need for this type of check of rebate programs.
Yeah, I mean, it would have like it's always nice to have
More
data
data.
that points to exactly why people are doing something, and we kind of just conceded that that might be impossible in this setting.
Yeah.
That the types of things people are doing are just not. They just don't stand out enough to be able to measure well, and I think that's actually sort of a general issue with nudges. Uh, nudges, like the whole premise of studying nudges is that they have pretty small effects, but it's so cheap to send out a nudge that you can do it at a scale where you can isolate the effect it has. But that really presents a challenge to the tools we have that allow us to pinpoint the mechanisms that underlie the effectiveness of a nudge. Because it's hard to do surveys that have high response rates with people when you're just sending letters. It's hard to get sort of the smoking gun kind of evidence that the public and economists, I think, really like. And so we sort of just conceded, like, look, we're not going to be able to do that. We're just going to try and infer it from what
Yeah.
remains in the home. And so that's both maybe a strength of our approach, but it's also a weakness. But
Yeah, it's
uh,
like you're not able to exactly point at which technology adoption it was. There's all these
yeah,
types of possibilities. You just
yeah,
observe what it is.
yeah.
Versus people like, oh, it's the light bulb. But that's really the thing we should be looking
Yeah,
at. Versus,
yeah. And
actually, yeah, yeah. Go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. You ask your question.
It's just, I mean, what I like is that my own thinking changes during these conversations, and I had never really thought about the fact that nudges inherently are like cheaper to do, but you can therefore do them at a bigger scale. You can get the result, but then it's often sometimes harder to measure where the result is coming from. It's like
Yeah.
inherently in the word nudge, it's a smaller effect. Now it
Mhm,
can have big effects in the right context. I think, especially with the
mhm,
saving things and like defaults. But I think sometimes like you say with certain technology channels, it's like a small effect. But then I do like the really then the core idea of your paper is thinking about the added element now, which you're bringing to the conversation with your paper is it's like, can you have a technology change for the person who's getting the nudge? Now we're expanding it to, but like for voting, or can you get them to install an app, or even an app that nudges them regularly?
mhm,
Maybe that's a great nudge if you can get them to install something that gives them more nudges. So
mhm,
because like even for climate and energy policy, it's like, how can we keep giving the thing, or how can we get them to install the technology
mhm.
um, that keeps
Yeah,
the behavior there?
yeah, and I think that you're maybe sort of getting to what I think is maybe the most important implication of what we do in the paper, which is that you know just just nudging for the sake of nudging, I think is a totally worthwhile exercise to learn about what works and to try and scale up the things that do work. But I think it also makes sense to try and have, and I think our paper highlights this well. I think it makes sense to really think through, like, what's the underlying thing that you think people are going to do in response to your nudge, and are the conditions in place for that to really be able to take hold or not. And so it's pretty straightforward to apply that thinking to the energy context. Like, if there's some new sort of low cost technology that would be really useful for people to adopt to conserve energy, then I think a nudge that can really grab people's attention and convince them to consider actions to address what they're doing is a really nice complement to technologies uh, that you want people to adopt. And so, instead of having this sort of like a theoretical, like, I don't really care how people are reacting, it seems to work when I run the experiment approach to conserving energy with nudges or addressing climate change with nudges. I think what we're pushing with the paper is trying to push people to either think like, what are some technologies that would be really useful if we got people to adopt right now? And can you design a nudge that can grab people's attention in a way that causes them to adopt that technology? That's sort of one version. And I think another version would be, could you take a nudge that is effective in the short term, and could you pair it with something that might give it a better chance of working in the long term? Like, could you pair it with a default, or could you pair it with an action with the option of being able to default? We sort of conjecture at the end of the paper that it might be the case that nudging people to vote could have longer term effects if the nudge included a card that allowed people to sign up for mail-in balloting, which would sort of over the long term maybe reduce the costs associated with continuing to undertake that behavior. You could also think of examples closer to the energy space where maybe there's not some new cheap technology that we really want people to push. And so instead, you could pair the nudge with trying to convince people to sign up for a critical peak pricing program where the incentives, the sort of they're going to change the incentives that they face, which might be able to produce longer lasting changes in behavior going forward. So that's a conjecture, but that's sort of what I think where we're pushing, where we're hoping people will go with this paper is thinking more about what exactly is the thing that's going to produce the long-term effects.
Yeah, more rigorous exactly about what are they going to change, like how is it changing? Because I also like the idea of the, grabbing your attention,
Mm-hmm.
Is getting you the smiley face report, but then also linked to adopt our peak pricing program, that you somehow enroll to something more systematic, or like the technology that's there. And it doesn't have to be technology as such, or just a program being enrolled. So
Yeah, to just emphasize that point, I think behavioral economics, which is sort of the name for the field that produced this work on nudges, I think it's just a wonderful. It offers a wonderful set of tools to grab people's attention, and it's got a spottier record when you think about really long-term lasting effects. I'm sure there's some good counterexamples where behaviorals really mattered, but I think the tools in the field are just really effective for grabbing people's attention. And so, thinking about ways to complement that with more traditional things, encouraging people to change the incentives they face or the technology that they adopt. Might be a way to sort of get the best of both worlds, to get the sort of that initial boost or that initial change in behavior, and then also the longer lasting effects that more conventional economics tends to focus on.
and I think it's a really good point, especially for energy and climate. For example, one thing that I'm thinking of is like heat pumps.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're touted here in Europe. Energy prices are very high, but that they can be really a good way for a lot of houses. But I think a lot of people are not aware of what they are or how they work. And I think that's exactly like, if you grab the attention, if you could use the tools from behavioral economics to grab your attention, make it sure that like show that it's beneficial for you, then that's great. Now, to some extent, they're already doing that, but I think behavioral economics here has a clearly good toolbox to do that. So I think it's and another thing that this is maybe unrelated, but one of the things that I always was struck by was a paper by Verboven and De Grote, and they were talking about solar panel adoption in Belgium. But Belgium, unlike the United States, had a very complicated rebate system. It's not like, oh, you buy it for $1,000 and then you get 50% off. It's like you buy it for $1,000 and then you get some rebate back on your electricity for the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And people just didn't realize how great it was. Like you basically, for buying something for 10,000, you got subsidies of 20,000. But I could see that just like behavior economics is like a tool like to make people realize or grab their attention to this is a great deal. So
yeah, I don't disagree. I think another way of putting what you were just saying is like there's really no way, there's really no like prices are always going to have some component of how they're framed. Like there's no frame free price. And there's better frames and worse frames, and behavioral economics I think sort of provides can provide some tools for thinking about the better frames and the worse frames. And it sounds like that policy in Belgium was maybe on the worse end of the framing side, and that maybe they could have gotten more out of what sounds like an incredibly expensive program if they had thought a little bit more about how to frame it.
absolutely. I think it's also budget wise that they couldn't take it from the general budget, so they like took it from future. There was some of that going on, but I still think it was just horribly framed.
Yeah.
But awesome. Well, I think we've already covered a lot. I want to be respectful of your time. Are there any topics or things from your paper that you feel like we haven't covered or you would like to add?
Yeah, I think maybe the only other thing I'd emphasize is a sort of a sister to that rental result that we were talking about, where the homes that were where the people were renting, it looked like it was all habit formation. The sister to that is we also had a similarly sized sample of homes that used electric heating, and so that used electricity for their heating as opposed to natural gas. And so our outcome in all of these is electricity. So those homes, the homes with electric heating, they could just for accounting reasons could produce a lot more savings with tech adoption. And that's exactly what we see them doing. I think we see like maybe 65% of the initial effect of the home energy report persisting in those homes versus 50 in on average and 0 with the renters. And so I think if there's sort of a story to tell here, and this is just conjecture, but I think the story to me is like maybe people sort of prioritize tech adoption because they know that that's the easiest way to get a better report card from your energy provider. But if it's not there, if that's not an option, and you send people letters long enough, maybe they will adopt habits. And so I think that's sort of the story I tell myself for how you can get all these effects.
Yeah.
But small result,
Yeah.
but maybe the last one we haven't talked about.
Awesome. And then are you doing further research in the energy nudges space?
Not at the moment. Well, I guess I do have. There's something I'm finishing up now that maybe your readers or that your listeners would find interesting, which is a paper where smart thermostats were randomized. So this is more of a conventional, just evaluating whether tech has an effect or not. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much this lingo is used everywhere, but or the extent to which subsidies are the same everywhere. But at least in the U.S., there's uh, there's a lot of money available for people who replace their thermostat with a smart thermostat. So with a smart
Okay.
thermostat
Yeah.
and connect to the internet, and you can interact with it on your phone. And so we have data from a very conventional experiment where people were recruited in all over California and then got free installation if they were randomized into the treatment group. And we just don't see any energy savings from the people who got the smart thermostat
Okay.
compared to the people who did not get the smart thermostat. And so not we're not I'm not zealous about tech being always being a solution. Smart thermostats seem to not provide the energy savings that the people in this home energy report study were adopting and using to save energy. And not exactly a nudge paper, but sort of very, very much a
Yeah.
cousin or very related to this study.
Awesome. And I think that also shows, you know, the critical mindset that you need as a researcher. You've advocated for a technology, you really want to think carefully, but then with the smart thermostat, you don't find it. So I would also say if anybody's listening, has some great energy thing, or they're an energy provider and they want to do a great field experiment, Alec is a great person to
Yeah,
contact. So,
feel free to email me.
so hopefully something comes out of it. So that would be awesome. So awesome. And then Alec, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure.